A lone human diver moved along the jagged shoreline of a remote ocean world. The sky was a soft gray, and the waves crashed against dark rocks. Mist rose from the sea, and salt stung his eyes. Each morning, he patrolled these waters, searching for debris or creatures in need. Today felt no different. Yet something in the surf would change his life forever. He was strong and steady, with years of training behind him. His routine was nearly ritual: check his gear, breathe deep, and plunge into the surf. At first light, he swam out, scanning for signs of danger. Thought of the families in distant colonies that depended on his reports. Felt pride in his work, though he sometimes wondered why so few came to help this forgotten planet then. Amid the whitecaps, he noticed a flash of movement. Something large and pale fought against the current. He squinted through spray, heart tightening. Whatever it was struggling. He kicked harder, cutting through the swirling water toward the shape. As he got closer, he saw a slender arm, waving, and a head bobbing under waves. Immediately, he knew this was no normal swimmer. He dove beneath the cresting wave, tension coiling in his chest. Salt water filled his mask as he reached out. The creature's form was unlike any he had seen: delicate curves, long limbs, and an unfamiliar texture to the skin. She thrashed weakly, her strength fading. Without a second thought, he wrapped an arm under her shoulders and lifted. The sea fought him every inch of the way. Waves slammed into his back. His muscles burned, but he refused to let go. At last he broke the surface, cradling the alien. Woman's limp form? She was unconscious, her braided hair floating like seaweed around her. He fought the current one more time and pushed toward the rocks. Each stroke measured and sure. He dragged her up over slick stones and onto a patch of hard-packed sand. His jacket was the only dry thing he had. He peeled it off and wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands were rough, but he guided the fabric gently, careful not to harm her. She lay still, chest rising and falling in quiet gasps. He bent close, checking for signs of life, relieved to find a steady pulse. The rising sun painted the sky in pale gold. He knelt beside her and offered water from his canteen. She swallowed slowly, her violet lips parting. She seemed fragile in the dawn light, yet there was a quiet strength in the set of her jaw. The jacket covered her torso, but he glimpsed a skin that shimmered with subtle patterns like the underbelly of a fish. After a moment, her eyelids fluttered. Her eyes opened, and he saw them clearly at last. Large, almond-shaped, glowing faintly violet. She blinked, confusion and wonder in equal measure. He held up a hand in greeting, fingers spread. She sat up slowly, the jacket slipping from her arms, and she wrapped it close to her chest. He pointed to himself and said one word: human. Then he pointed to her and said, you. He did not know her language, but his tone was soft. She nodded, and the corner of her lips curved into a small smile. Despite the chill, her gratitude was clear. He felt a warm rush of relief and pride. She pushed herself upright and looked around at the rocky shore. Behind them, the waves roared, and a few dark clouds drifted low. She made a sound soft, melodic, almost like a sigh he could not name. Instead, he reached into a small pouch and pulled out a spare thermal blanket. He draped it around her shoulders, pressing gently. She lifted her hand and brushed a lock of wet hair from her face. Droplets slid down her cheek. She stared at him, awe and fear mingling in her gaze. He nodded and offered his hand. After a pause, she placed her delicate fingers in his larger ones, rose to her feet unsteadily, her weight borne on slender limbs that seemed too fragile for this harsh world. He guided her over the sand, keeping his hand at her back. Each step was slow and careful. She leaned on him willingly, trusting him though she did not know his name. He glanced down at her, noting the faint patterns on her skin swirls and lines that reminded him of constellations. He felt a deep curiosity stir inside him. The path led upward over a small rise of rocks. He paused at the top and looked back at the ocean. The sun was higher now, and the mist was beginning to lift. He looked at the alien woman at his side, and for the first time he wondered where she had come from, what wonders or dangers lay beyond that sea. Together, They reached a flat stretch of shore strewn with driftwood and shells. He guided her toward a narrow trail leading inland. Stepped lightly, her bare feet brushing the sand. He thought of the long journey ahead, how he would help her find food or shelter, or someone who could understand her voice. He was determined to do whatever he could. As they walked, he did not speak. Words felt too small. Beside him, the alien woman held her breath, taking in the alien world around her. The faint glow in her eyes matched the glimmer of sunlight on the water. He had rescued a stranger from the sea, but he did not yet know how extraordinary she truly was. The tide was falling now, leaving behind pools that reflected the vast sky. He paused and placed a hand on her shoulder. She stopped and looked at him, her head tilted. He nodded, and together they continued. He guided her to safety. On firm ground, unaware that his simple act of kindness would echo across the stars, he led her gently down a narrow path that wound between tall ferns and mossy stones. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. Soft light filtered through thick leaves overhead, and the ground was firm beneath their boots. She moved slowly, her hand resting on his arm for support. He watched her carefully, making sure she did not stumble. Each step seemed to bring her back to life, and he felt relief bloom in his chest. They walked side by side in a quiet companionship born of crisis. Neither spoke much, but their shared journey spoke louder than words. As they reached a small clearing, he knelt beside a patch of soft grass. From his pack, he drew a simple meal: dried fruit, protein bars, and fresh water. She watched him with great curiosity, her violet eyes wide. He tore a piece of dried fruit and held it out. After a moment's pause, she took it, her slender fingers brushing his. She chewed slowly, savoring the sweet taste, and nodded in thanks. He poured water into her hand, and she drank in small sips, careful not to spill a drop. And sip, color returned to her cheeks, and her breathing grew more even. When she seemed stronger, she reached into a small pouch tied at her waist. He watched as she withdrew a strange, flat object that glowed with a soft blue light. It was about the size of his palm and bore patterns that pulsed gently. Shh. She held it out to him, then withdrew it as if shy. He took it carefully and felt warmth spread through his fingers. He pressed a thumb against its surface, and instantly the glow dimmed. She smiled at him, relief and hope in her eyes. He realized she trusted him enough to share a part of her world. She rose to her feet and beckoned him to follow. He stood and slung his pack over one shoulder. She walked ahead now with more confidence, though she glanced back often to make sure he was close. The forest around them grew denser, and strange birds called overhead. Vines hung like curtains between branches, and small flowers of bright colors dotted the ground. The path narrowed and wound down toward the sound of water. He could hear a gentle rush, and his pulse quickened with anticipation. They stepped into a hidden glade, and before them lay a wide lagoon of crystal water. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the green canopy above. In the center rose a circular arch of smooth stone, half submerged, glowed faintly at the edges as if lit by moonlight trapped within. She approached it with reverence, her eyes shining. He moved beside her, studying the arch's smooth curves and the runes carved deep into its surface. The air smelled of salt and magic. He realized this was no ordinary place. It was a portal. He hesitated, uncertainty tightening his chest. He looked at her and saw only calm determination. She placed a hand on the arch, and the glow flared brighter. Droplets danced on the water's surface, as if something moved beneath. She turned to him, her gaze steady, and nodded. With that small gesture, he knew she asked him to trust her again. Squared his shoulders, set his jaw, and stepped forward. Her hand found his, and together they passed through the arch. A swirl of light and shadow engulfed them, and for a moment he felt weightless. Images flashed behind his eyes: stars, galaxies, strange symbols. The air shifted from warm forest mist to cool, recycled breath. Then the world snapped back into focus, and he found himself under a vast ceiling of metal and light. He stood in a huge hangar bay, and his mouth went dry. Towering starships lined the walls, and armored crew members in shining uniforms moved, with purpose. They paused and stared at him, whispering among themselves. She guided him through the hangar toward a raised walkway. Lights along the floor glowed beneath his boots, and soft hums vibrated through the ground. Crew members stepped aside respectfully as they passed. Some bowed, others offered nods of greeting. He felt the weight of many eyes on him, and his heart pounded. She gave him a reassuring squeeze of the hand, and he lifted his chin. Though he felt out of place, her calm confidence bolstered him. At the end of the walkway, they entered a room of soft light. Walls curved upward in a smooth dome, and a large window looked out into deep space. Beyond floated distant stars and a planet he did not recognize. Ahead of them stood a tall figure in a fine uniform, hands clasped behind a straight back. Stepped forward and bowed low, and he imitated her as best he could. The figure's gaze was kind, and when she straightened, she gestured at him. "He saved my life." The alien woman spoke in careful words that echoed softly. Her voice carried across the room. The leader's lips curved in a gentle smile. Nodded gratefully, his voice caught in his throat. She spoke again in a melodic tone he could not understand. The leader turned to him and bowed slightly as if to welcome him to this place. Crew members gathered at a respectful distance, curious and watchful. The alien woman spoke once more, then pointed to the leader and back to the human. The leader took a step forward and placed a small device in his hand. It glowed with the same blue light as her relic, felt warmth spread through his palm. The leader's eyes met his, and he understood. This was the beginning of the reward she had promised. He held the device close, his heart swelling with gratitude. Outside the window, a nebula glowed like a sea of stars. He looked at the alien woman, her face soft with relief and joy. She placed a hand on his arm and nodded toward the window. Together, they stood, looking out into the vast unknown. His simple act of kindness had carried him far from the rocky shore and into the starry halls of a foreign ship. He did not yet know what wonders awaited him, but he felt that his life would never be the same. After the leader left, she closed the door behind them and turned to him. Her violet eyes were bright with expectation. He felt his heart beat fast as he realized she would now share more of her world. He nodded, and she led him down a curved corridor. Soft lights pulsed along the floor, guiding their steps. The walls around them were alive with color. Pale blue veins of light waved like gentle currents in the ocean. He reached out and touched one. It felt warm, almost like a living creature. They walked in silence, but the silence was not empty. It held promise and questions. She paused beside a wide viewport. Outside, stars drifted by in slow motion. A distant planet glowed green and blue, its oceans bright against dark land masses. He pressed his palm to the glass and felt dizzy with wonder. She placed a hand on his shoulder and watched his face. He smiled, though his mouth felt dry. He had never seen space so close. She turned and beckoned him onward. They came to a tall door carved with symbols. She tapped a pattern on its frame, and it slid open. Inside was a small room lit by gentle white light. In its center stood a holotable. She pressed her relic to a panel, and the holotable sprang to life. Above them, a three-dimensional map of her homeworld rotated slowly. Oceans, continents, and cloud patterns shimmered in blue and green. She pointed to a region fractured by red cracks. Her voice was soft as she spoke in her own tongue. He could not understand words, but he saw the holomap shift. The cracks grew larger, and bright pulses moved along them like running lights. She then touched a symbol on the table, and an image of a small city appeared. Tall spires, glowing fountains, and fields of silver grass surrounded a great crater. She faded the city and showed another image, a relic half buried in sand beneath dark waves. Its shape was like two rings linked by a bar. It pulsed with blue light, just like her device. She sighed, and her shoulders trembled. He saw her close her eyes as if trying to hold back tears. His mind raced. He looked at her and spoke quietly. "We will help." She opened her eyes and stared at him. Relief washed over her face. She pressed his hand against the holomap. The map shifted again, and he saw tiny markers traveling from her world toward this ocean planet. One marker glowed brighter. She whispered a few words in her language, then said in broken common, "We leave soon." He nodded and swallowed hard. He thought of home, of the families who waited for his reports. He thought of the cold ocean, the rocks, and the soft dawn air. Yet he felt no fear, felt purpose. He would go with her to find the relic, would do whatever it took. She led him back into the corridor. They passed crew members who offered curious glances. He bowed his head politely. She touched his arm and smiled. Together they climbed a spiral ramp that took them toward the ship's bridge. On the way, he saw sections of the ship's living skin panels that shifted color with each crew member's mood. They glowed gentle green at his approach and soft pink when she passed.
Wow.
It was a system of welcome and communication he did not. Fully grasped at the bridge entrance, 2 guards in bright uniforms saluted. She returned the salute and they stepped aside. Inside, the bridge was a ring of consoles and holograms. Crew members tapped at floating displays. One officer spoke into a small device, then turned and studied them. She held his hand and squeezed gently. He took a breath and followed her to the main console. She placed her relic on the console, aligning it with a docking ring. The ship shuddered as power rerouted through the device. Lights on the consoles blinked faster. The holomap of the local system appeared above them, showing planets, moons, and star lanes. She pointed to a blue-green dot marked Nexus. He recognized its position near home. She tapped the dot, and a bright line connected it to her world. The captain stepped forward, a tall figure in silver cloak. He bowed to her, and then to the human. She explained in broken common, "This is our path. We will go to Nexus and dive deep to find the relic." The captain's eyes flicked to the human. He nodded once, then spoke in perfect common. "We will prepare the submersible. We launch in 6 hours." The human turned to her. 6 hours?" he repeated. She nodded and smiled. She led him from the bridge. As they walked, he felt both excitement and nervousness. He had dived in oceans before, but never into space or into another world's war. He knew danger would come, but he did not doubt his choice. She walked beside him, calm and sure. They reached a small lounge filled with soft seats and tables. Crew members relaxed here between shifts. She guided him to a table and motioned for 2 seats. He sat and looked around. The walls here glowed soft lavender, and a gentle hum filled the air. She pressed a panel on the table and 2 trays slid out. On one was a simple meal of warm bread, cheese, and fruit. On the other, a bowl of glowing blue orbs that floated. Like bubbles, she lifted one orb with a slender spoon and offered it to him. He hesitated, then tasted it. It was cool and sweet, like water that had captured moonlight. He smiled and nodded. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. She then ate bread and cheese with him. They shared silence, but it felt like a conversation after. Eating, she spoke softly. "My name is Arya." He smiled and answered, "I am Jace." She nodded, and her eyes softened. They left the lounge hand in hand. He felt a bond growing between them. They passed through more corridors, toward the engineering deck in engineering. The air was warm and smelled of metal and oil. Engines thrummed with power. He watched crew members adjust valves and replace glowing crystals in power conduits. She led him to a small workshop. Tools floated beside a bench, tethered by gentle force fields. She placed a hand on one tool, and it lifted to her palm. She gave it to him, and he marveled at its smooth weight. She showed him a panel on the workshop. While it displayed the relic's signal, blinking moved slowly across a map of Earth's ocean floors. She tapped a location in the Pacific Trench. The signal was faint, but steady. She turned to him, eyes eager. He nodded, then pressed a button on a nearby console. Schematics for a submersible appeared. She smiled and kissed his cheek. He felt warmth flood his face. She explained that the submersible would dive to the trench and retrieve the relic. Then they would face her pursuers. He swallowed and looked at her. She gave him a small nod, as if to say she believed in him. He took a deep breath and smiled back. As they left engineering, the ship's lights dimmed and brightened in waves. The living walls pulsed around them, as if the ship itself was breathing. He looked at Arya and felt hope stir in his chest. Would find the relic. They would save her world. And he would stand by her side, ready for whatever came next. Jace, suiting up inside the small submersible, felt a tight knot in his stomach. Arya sat beside him, calm as ever, checking systems on the console. The pod's walls glowed with soft light. Outside, a large hangar door opened to the void, he felt. The rush of air as the craft separated. The view through the front viewport showed the endless black water. Jace took a deep breath and reached for the control stick. Arya placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. They exchanged a silent nod. The pilot tapped a pattern on a screen and said, "We begin descent in 3, 2, 1. A hum rose. Beneath them, as the submersible started its journey down the dark sea, as the craft sank. Pressure built like a heavy weight around them. The water grew darker, but lights on the submersible cut through the gloom. Broken shapes drifted past like ghost ships, their forms strange and silent. Tiny bioluminescent creatures flickered in the beam, casting eerie shadows on the hull. Arya studied the scanner display while Jace guided the pod deeper. His heart pounded with every meter they descended. The walls vibrated gently with the movement. A soft hum under the roar of water outside. Each meter down felt new and strange in his bones. Rocky walls rose on either side, closing around the pod like ancient cliffs carved by time. He heard Arya whisper soft words of encouragement, her voice a calm anchor. Though they were alone in the deep, they were together. After an hour of careful descent, the submersible reached the trench's brim. Sensors glowed red as they crossed the trench edge. Outside the viewport, the ocean floor fell away into darkness. Arya tapped a button, and the craft's arms extended. Jace watched as she guided one arm toward a shape half buried in sand. Relic lay there, its linked rings pulsing with blue light. The pod's lights washed over it, revealing ancient carvings and smooth edges. He felt his heart pound in his chest like a drum. She operated the scanner to confirm it was the same design. Then she turned and looked at him with gratitude shining in her glowing eyes. With a calm nod, she moved the arm slowly. Claw closed around the relic's edge and lifted it free. The light pulsed brighter as it left the sand. Relief and excitement filled the cabin. Just as Arya secured the relic, alarms sounded. Red lights flashed inside the cabin, reflecting on their tense faces. Jace glanced at the scanner. 2 blips moved toward their position like deadly predators tracking prey. Hostile vessels. He reached for the controls, adrenaline surging.
Outside he saw swift shapes cutting through the water.
Torpedo tracks lit small lines of bubbles like silent arrows. Arya called out numbers, her voice steady despite the danger. He spun the submersible, avoiding the first volley of torpedoes. The craft rattled as explosions echoed around them. He powered forward, weaving between rocky pillars that scraped the hull. The water shook around them as each impact rattled the craft's frame. Arya adjusted the relic's containment field. The threat pressed in from all sides. The water churned with violence. Maneuvering in the confined trench tested Jace's skill and nerves. He angled the pod through a narrow canyon barely wider than the craft. Torpedoes struck stone walls, sending debris swirling like miniature landslides. Each impact rattled the submersible, and alarms chimed in protest. He kept his hands steady on the controls. Arya fed commands into a panel, rerouting power to the shields. Sparks flew in one corner and the air smelled of burning circuits. He gritted his teeth. The sub's speed dropped as damage slowed the thrusters. Jace searched the scanner for a safe corridor. He spotted a gap beneath an overhang, just wide enough to slip through. He aimed and accelerated. The pod slipped through with inches to spare, scraping but holding firm. Behind them, the pursuers closed in, their engines roaring with intent. He felt the relic pulse in its container, as if urging him to hurry. He pressed the throttle and broke into open water, leaving the hunters behind. The climb back to the surface was tense, each meter risking collapse or pursuit. The trench walls gave way to open water. Light from above grew stronger in shimmering bands. Jace watched the water streams dance like silver sparks against the glass. He monitored the damage on his console. A small breach leaked water near the engine compartment, a thin stream that hissed as metal warped. Arya held a hand to her chest and whispered a soft prayer in her tongue. He engaged emergency systems to seal the leak, redirecting coolant and diverting power. The craft shuddered, but stayed intact. They rose slowly, the world around them lightening with each ascent. At last the surface came into view. Gentle ripples shimmered under the sun. Jace guided the sub to meet a support drone, its mechanical. Arms clicking as it latched on. It lifted the pod toward the awaiting cruiser. Aboard the starship, engineers rushed to the submersible's bay. Jace and Arya emerged into bright light. The relic glowed softly in its secure case, pulsing in time. With Arya's steady heartbeat, crew members cheered quietly, offering nods and smiles of respect. Arya embraced Jace, relief and gratitude flooding her face. He smiled, though his clothes were damp. Engineers inspected the hull and began repairs with urgent precision. Jace offered to help, moving elbow first under the engineer's guidance to tighten a panel bolt. Arya watched him with pride shining in her eyes. She approached and placed a hand on his arm, speaking in her own language. Then in broken common, "You saved us." Jace shook his head gently, voice catching. "We saved each other." Smiled and said, "And now we prepare for the next step." He felt warmth spread through him. He realized his simple act had become a shared victory. Together, they carried the relic back to the holotable, ready to bring hope to her war-torn world. Jace climbed from the submersible's hatch and stepped into the bright hangar. Arya was already waiting, her eyes bright with relief. Around them, engineers worked to repair the pod's hull. Sparks flew as they patched metal plates. A soft hiss marked each seal. Jace wiped salt water from his brow. He offered to help, but an engineer shook his head and smiled. "Rest," she said in broken common. He nodded and turned to Arya. Together, they walked down the corridor toward the ship's medical bay. The medical bay was calm and cool. Lights above glowed with gentle green. Arya's uniform was damp, so she sat on a padded table. Jace watched as a medic scanned her with a small device. The screen showed warmth moving through her body. The medic nodded and tapped a panel. "Minor shock," she said. "You both pushed hard." Arya smiled and reached for Jace's hand. He squeezed her fingers and watched the medic finish. After a moment, she stood and offered water. Arya drank gratefully. Jace felt pride. He had kept them safe. They left the medical bay and walked in silence. The living walls pulsed soft pink under their feet. Jace studied the floor patterns as they went. Every corridor seemed to stretch into another world. Arya led him to the holoroom. Inside, the holotable waited. The relic lay in a secure case. Beside it, she lifted it gently and placed it on the table's docking ring. The case glowed and opened. The relic floated above, its ring spinning slowly. Arya tapped a symbol on the table's surface. The holomap of her homeworld appeared. Again, the red fractures glowed in tense lines. But now, a new glow pulsed at the heart of the fractures. She pointed to it. Jace watched the lines soften, dimming from red to pale orange. She looked at him and smiled. It meant the relic's power could heal the land. He nodded, understanding her joy. Together, they studied the map and traced a safe path to her world's capital. Each line they drew felt like hope. The captain's voice came through the door's intercom. "Prepare for warp." Arya gathered the relic and slipped it into a special pouch at her belt. Jace slung his pack over his shoulder. They hurried along the deck toward the shuttle bay. Crew members paused to bow or salute of their respect. They passed rows of fighters and transport ships. Finally, they reached a sleek shuttle with blue markings. Arya opened the door and invited him in first. He stepped inside, amazed by the small cabin packed with controls and displays. She closed the hatch and nodded to the pilot. The shuttle detached from the cruiser and moved into space. Jace pressed his hand to the viewport and watched stars shift. Arya sat beside him, her hand resting on the relic pouch. The pilot engaged the warp drive. The view warped and stretched into lines of light. Jace felt a pull in his chest as they slipped through the star lanes. Distant suns shimmered on the edges of his vision. He thought of home and then of Arya's world. The relic's light seemed to glow in time with the stars. Moments later, the shuttle dropped out of warp above Arya's planet. It was scarred by war. Vast craters pockmarked the surface. Broken cities lay in shadow beneath black smoke. Jace's heart clenched at the sight. Arya leaned forward, tears welling in her violet eyes. She whispered words in her language voice. Trembling, Jace placed a hand on her shoulder. She nodded and wiped her tears. The shuttle turned and headed toward a safe zone near the capital. They landed on a landing pad surrounded by tall walls. Guards in blue and silver uniforms met them. Arya stepped out first, relic in hand. Jace followed, careful on the uneven ground. The city lay beyond the gates, towers scarred by fire and fields once green, now brown. People moved in small groups, eyes wary. Arya held the relic high. A hush fell. Jace felt the crowd lean in, hope and fear mingling on their faces. Arya led them through the streets. Jace at her side stopped at a grand plaza. At its center stood an ancient fountain, its waters dried. She placed the relic on the fountain's base. The relic glowed bright blue and pulsed outward. Dust rose from the stones as energy rippled. The fountain's basin filled with water that glowed like the sky at dawn. Cheers rose from the crowd. Jace watched as people reached to touch the water. Their faces lit with wonder. From nearby windows, leaders of her world watched. They came forward, robes trailing behind them. Arya bowed deeply, and Jace imitated her. The leaders examined the relic's light. One reached out and touched it. The relic's glow spread to his fingertips. He closed his eyes and sighed as if a burden lifted. Then he turned and spoke in Arya's tongue. Jace did not understand the words, but everyone around him cheered. Arya's leaders guided her and Jace to a raised platform. They thanked them in broken common. "You have saved our world." Arya stepped forward and spoke softly into a console. Her words carried across the plaza. She thanked the human people for his courage. Jace bowed and raised a hand. The crowd erupted in applause, felt warmth spread through him. His simple act of kindness had shaped destiny. As evening came, the square glowed with lanterns. Arya and Jace stood on the platform watching families gather with new water. Children laughed and splashed in the fountain. Jace looked at Arya. Her eyes were bright with relief and joy. She touched his arm and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled and shook his head. She laughed, a sound of pure happiness. Together, they watched the first steps of a new dawn for her world. The days following the restoration of the fountain passed in a whirlwind of celebrations. Jace and Arya were treated like heroes. They toured the capital, visiting communities that had been restored by the energy of the relic. People greeted them with smiles, some even holding small offerings of fruits and flowers. The sky, once dim and clouded with the haze of war, now shone with clarity. The air was clean, and the atmosphere hummed with a new life. Jace still felt out of place, but he had learned much about Arya's world. The relic's power had mended not only the land, but also the hearts of its people. With the restoration of the fountain, other regions began to heal too. Crops began to grow again, and the city's broken buildings slowly took shape, their structures firm with new life. The once dying world was now on the path to recovery, but Jace knew that their work wasn't done yet. The relic, while it had revived the land, also marked a larger battle for peace and unity. Arya had told him that the war between the factions of her people was far from over. Even though the relic had brought hope, the struggles of power and control had only been postponed, not erased. There was still tension, and old wounds ran deep. One afternoon, as they walked through a newly rebuilt market, Jace could feel the unease in the air. People were talking in hushed tones, and the smiles that once filled their faces were now a little more reserved. He glanced at Arya, whose eyes were distant, focused on something far beyond the city. She had always seemed composed, but he knew there was more on her mind. "What's going on?" Jace asked, his voice low. Arya hesitated before answering, her gaze drifting over the crowd. "The factions are still divided," she said softly. "The relic has given hope, but it hasn't resolved the deeper issues. There are still those who fight for power, and many feel the relic should be used for more than just restoring the land." Jace frowned. "So, it's not over? Not yet?" "No," Arya replied, shaking her head. "The healing has begun, but the true work lies ahead." The weight of her words hung in the air. Jace had known the relic wasn't a simple solution, but hearing it from Arya made him feel the burden of her world's struggles even more. As the days passed, the city continued to thrive, but the tension in the air only grew. It became clear that while the relic had restored the land, it hadn't healed the hearts of everyone. In the council halls, heated debates continued about the next steps. Some believed the relic's power should be used to bring all factions together, while others wanted to keep it for their own control. Arya had become the symbol of hope, but she had also become the target of those who sought to control her world's future. Jace could see it in the way people whispered when she passed by, and in the cold stares from the more powerful leaders who watched her every move. They didn't understand the burden she carried. One evening, as Jace and Arya walked through the peaceful gardens that overlooked the capital, Arya spoke softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I fear that even with the relic we may not be able to heal this world fully. Some believe power is the only way to ensure peace, but I don't know." Jace stopped walking and turned to face her. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of a world that had been torn apart by war. He reached out and gently touched her hand. "You've done more than anyone else could. The relic has given hope, and it's not the end of this world, it's the beginning. It's not just about power, it's about unity, about people coming together to rebuild." Arya looked at him, her eyes softening. "But how do we get them to see that?" she whispered. "How do we show them that true strength comes from standing together?" Jace thought for a moment before replying. "You've already done it. By leading with kindness, by showing them that a better world is possible. They see that in you. Now, you need to let them see it in themselves." She smiled faintly, her fingers tightening around his. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been too focused on the things I can't control." Together they stood in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The soft glow of twilight bathed the city in a peaceful light, and for a moment everything felt still. Jace didn't have all the answers, but he knew that with Arya's strength and the hope the relic had brought, they could help her world find its way. The next day, the council convened again. Jace was by Arya's side as she addressed the leaders of the factions. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of conviction. She spoke not of power, but of unity, of the potential for a future where all factions could thrive together. She reminded them of the shared bond they had through the relic, the shared hope that had awakened in the land and in the people's hearts. The room was tense, but as she spoke, Jace could feel the shift. Some of the leaders looked uneasy, others thoughtful, but slowly the walls of distrust began to crack. One by one, they began to speak, offering tentative steps toward reconciliation. As the meeting ended, the leaders rose and exchanged quiet words with one another. The path to peace was still uncertain, but the foundation had been laid. Arya had done what she had set out to do. She had brought hope. Now she was leading her people toward the possibility of something greater. Jack smiled as he stood beside her. She had given her world a chance to heal. Together, they had ignited a spark that would continue to burn. Their journey wasn't over yet, but they had taken the first steps toward a future where hope, unity, and love could finally take root. And, for the first time since his arrival, Jace felt certain that no matter the obstacles ahead, this world, her world, would find its peace.